very, very barren and very cold. I took the ferry there.
Ah, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I took the ferry to the Orkneys, and we passed
Uh,
through this area called the Scapa Flow, which is a very, very historical place as
that's
far
right.
as
Yes.
war history is concerned. And I keep
Yes.
coming across it on documentary, so it was a big deal to see
Yes.
it.
That was the Royal Navy base during the First World War, Scapa Flow,
Yeah, yeah, and the Second
and
World
and
War
also
too, and the
Second World
second,
War too. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Do you know why they built the naval base at Scapa Flow in northern Scotland?
I would imagine because it was quite remote, and I think the bay itself
Yes.
seemed to be quite protective until a German U-boat came in and whacked them.
The Royal Oak was sunk. Yes.
Yes.
It was built because to get away from German attacks, from air and sea attacks, because most of the Royal Navy bases are along the channel. So if you
Hmm.
have your Portsmouth, Plymouth, and then also along the western coast of Scotland, of
Mm-hmm.
the UK. Yeah.
Then they would be within range. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes, they are. Yes.
Mm.
But Uncle, I see you're very excited over the history. You like
Oh,
history?
It's my
history.
passion actually.
Yeah, I like
Oh,
history.
it shows.
Nowadays, if you tell people you like history, they all stare at you as if you're gone bonkers because what they remember of history is all of the
Yeah.
stupid rubbish that they learn in school. But history itself is
Yes.
actually, if it is written by somebody with a
Yes.
great mind who done a lot of research and is a brilliant writer, is brilliant reading.
Yeah,
Very,
Mm.
very, very. Yes.
we learn
You know,
much from history too.
I meet people who were, well, in those days, people who were what, 40, 50 years older to me, and I could relate to them, or they could relate to me because I knew what they
Mm.
had went through, especially if they had served in a war.
Yep.
And they were very, very touched. You know, I was in a plane and I was sitting beside this English gentleman, and
Mm.
he had served in the Royal Air Force, had served in the Royal Air Force Bomber Command,
Mm.
was a pilot of a Lancaster bomber,
Mm.
and he flew two tours.
Mm.
You know,
And survive.
and survived. And in the Second World War, 50,000 men of the Royal Air Force Bomber Command died
Mm.
doing all those
Wow.
bombing raids into Germany.
Yeah, the finest.
Yes. So, any last minute tips, Anwar?
No last minute, no last minute tips.
Uh-huh.
Um, just we just chat, I guess. So
Yes.
Um, I'm gonna go and get me a glass of water. Pardon
sure,
me for a while, folks.
sure.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
go ahead.
Sekar, you're now.
Anwar, I see we are on YouTube too, is it?
Yes, we are.
Hmm.
You know, this is the first time I'm trying this uh, webinar,
Uh-huh.
and so I decided to see if I can try the whole hog
Right.
and see what happens.
Hmm.
But interestingly enough, Seika is my co-host, but I can't seem to remove him from the panel. I'm not sure why.
Mm.
Mm.
You have to see, but your image will come. Okay. Um, but it shows as Seika Shanmugam in a block.
Yes.
Yeah, we see
So
Sekar.
you have to exit and then re-enter. No.
And on
How
YouTube, where do we find this?
interesting, right? I have absolutely no idea. Oh, yeah, under maybe under my search for my name, Anwar Jumabot.
Okay.
All right, let's try.
I reached out to a number of my contacts,
I got it.
Anwar.
Moved you.
So
Yes.
I think they are also joining us in for this.
Oh, perfect. Yes, yes. I noticed that after you asked about the registration, there was a bit of a jump in the registration. So, where are we
Yeah,
live?
we are live on YouTube. It's under Anwar, your account.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
You know, this is the thing that's happening with the COVID, right? You're just learning new things,
Yes.
and I love it because you're learning on the fly. I mean, it does cause some palpitations, um, because you don't know whether it's going to work or not.
Yeah. I must admit, I am not a technical person, so I struggle.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow, we've got some helpful friends here telling us how to go on this YouTube.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's great, right? So everybody pitches in to help.
Yeah.
And so it's really an interesting. You know, there's a very interesting book called the the Church and the Cathedral,
Mm-hmm.
and I think is that what it's called? It's something in the Cathedral. Basically, it talks about how Microsoft spent all their millions of dollars to build Encarta and took forever, and it was of no use. But at the same time, Wikipedia started completely voluntary and built the whole community of Wiki. So there are two approaches: the command and control approach, or there is the cloud, and that's why I'm still a fan of Waze, and I still use Waze because I think it's a wonderful community app.
Ah,
Question: How many of you donate to Wikipedia?
I've not.
I do every year. I will give a couple of $100. I just feel so much in debt to them.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they don't charge for anything, and they will send something out every year asking for donation, and then I just send a small amount.
Right.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that they once that they launch the appeal quite often, though I see it pop up off and on.
Yeah, I get it once a year, so I don't know. There could be some occasional thing that they may do also lah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but now you make me feel guilty, Asa. I think I will.
That's right.
I have from Wikipedia. I agree.
Exactly. It's like, buying a set of encyclopedias and what it would cost us money.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. No, it does cost. It's just that when something is free, you always have a tendency to think, okay, should I or should I not?
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's always the problem, right?
Yeah.
Should I not? So I think we're pretty spot on time. So welcome to everybody who is participating in this webinar. And I can see quite a few people have logged in already. Just a bit of introduction, and I want to keep generally introductions short. We are quite honored to have some senior HR practitioners. Azza, who has a long history with companies like Standard Chartered Bank, DG, Maxis, and of course a long spell at AirAsia. So different environments. Sukling also, I've known her from the days when I think she was at Eclipse and then Tokyo Marine. So Sukling again, a long practitioner, and Unku Harun, who was with Khazanah and also then with Johor Corp. So we have three very seasoned practitioners. And the purpose today really is to talk through KPIs, and how KPIs can be made to work. So I'm going to sort of kick off the question by asking the panelists, what really is a KPI? I mean, Azza, what's a KPI?
Okay, this is very interesting. KPI, the K stand for key performance indicators. By definition, anything that say key must be important. Now, if you have a set of goals given to you by your boss or negotiated with your boss that has 15 so-called KPIs, all of them given weightages of 5% or 7% or whatever, there is something absolutely wrong with the whole thing. How can you have 15 key performance indicators? I would imagine that for anything to be key, there couldn't be more than 3 or 5, and the rest of it would be just PIs. So I mean, perhaps I'm getting a little bit too excited with words and nomenclature here, but that has always been my problem. For it to be a key performance indicator, there has to be only a handful that you can remember in your sleep, and the rest of it would be a second level, a third level performance indicator. They should never be in the basket of a big thing that you are supposed to achieve. So that has always been my problem with the KPI thing.
So in terms of KPI, I mean, essentially what you're saying is there has to be very few, and therefore they are key.
Yes.
And Unku Sukling, what do you think?
Okay, maybe I'll start first, if you don't mind. As what Azhar says, it's a key performance indicator. So essentially, it's a statistical record. So that's the thing that we must be very, very clear. A statistical record in measuring the progress or achievement towards a performance indicator. So I think that's the thing that we have to be very, very clear about. And I also feel that we shouldn't be zero in on the KPI immediately. You got to take a step back and you got to look what is the intention behind it, because the KPI comes in a little bit later. What to me is more important, it should be the strategy, the direction of the company. You define the strategy, and once you define the strategy, you'll be able to define the objective. Once you define the
Sorry,
objective,
Unku, let me
yes.
step in there. So are you saying that this, or could it be that, you know, the boss defines the strategy and it's reflected in KPIs, and so you only have to worry about KPIs? Is that a possibility?
The boss, you say, can define the strategy, although of course we look at it from a senior management perspective. Then they develop their scorecard for the organization and then for that division or that department. Then it has to be cascaded down from the company. I call it tier 1. Then you go to the division or the department, which is tier 2. And only then, after it has cascaded to that level, it goes down to the individual, which is the third tier.
So by releasing this, are you providing an opportunity to dispute the KPI? Because what you're saying is, I have a strategy and I have a KPI, and I think they're mapped tightly, but actually they may not be.
Yes. It should be mapped. If you follow the process, it should be mapped out. At the stage where you are already cascading to the individual, the thinking has already been quite substantial. And
but you know, in an organization, you get people coming in, you get some people who didn't participate, they come in later.
Yes.
So you get this constant flux, right? So to Aza's point of there should only be 2 or 3 KPIs, is that something that you agree with?
Yes, I agree. You should have about half a dozen KPIs for the individual. Nothing more than that.
So we've gone from 2 to 3 to maybe 15 back down to 6.
Yes.
Sukling,
15 is way too much.
6. Sukling, what's your view?
Okay, my view is that to Asa's point about key performance indicators, there shouldn't be too many, because then what is key and where should the priority and focus be on for the individual? So in terms of the organization, to Unku's point was that the organization needs to have a strategy. And in order to get to where they want to go to, there are many things that needs to get done. I mean, some belongs to sales, some to finance, and some to operations and all that. So there could be many goals for the organization, and each department has a part to play. So and each department has got, I don't know, 5 employees, 100 employees. Each employee would have their own performance indicators. And each of them would not have the 20 goals. I mean, they would have that 3 to 5 most important things. And if you hit these 5 things, you are there. And we accumulate that 5 multiplied by 100, by 1,000 employees. And that's where the organization achieve that performance goal that they want to achieve.
So let's try and dig in a little deeper. When you say the KPI, are we talking about sort of general stuff, right? Like, so we want to achieve a gross margin of X, or we want to achieve top line of Y? Or are we saying that we want to complete a particular project? So how do you decide what to set as a KPI? You know, so in HR, it could be, I want to implement a performance appraisal system, which I don't like, but anyway. but assuming that the organization feels it necessary to implement a performance appraisal system, is that a KPI? Or has a KPI got to be part of the organizational outcome?
I think setting an appraisal system, it's a business as usual thing. Or unless you say we never have one,
Yes.
and we want to have one, that is a project. So, and that project belongs to a team. And yes, and they need to get it done either by paper format or by system automation format, depends on the complexity they want to implement. So, and they need to get it done within the next 6 months. So yes, that is the key goal that they need to achieve.
So how we use these words interchangeably, right? Key goal and key performance indicator. I mean, how do you differentiate?
You can't.
Okay.
And that is actually the biggest problem. My biggest issue about the whole thing is not that I don't believe there should be standard that people have to meet. I don't believe that. It's not that I don't believe there should be achievement that people should be held accountable for. I just think that they are so damn hard to achieve. And there are two approaches when you think it is hard to achieve. And by the way, this assume that all of the strategy and everything has been set and the company is happy with the strategy, and it comes down to how to achieve the strategy. One assumption is that the organization is a very mechanical thing. There are levers and there are things that pushes and pull, and you just to tweak it a little bit here and grease a little bit there and make this thing a bit more effective, and then bang, you get your goal. The other approach, which is more of how I see organization, is that organization is a very dynamic, organic thing. There isn't any particular point that you can grease, that you can improve, that you can add a bit more power, a bit more leverage, and then you achieve the goal. So when you believe that organization is organic, then you start thinking more about engagement, you start thinking more about putting great leaders in, you start putting more about making sure that the vision is accepted by everybody, and you start focusing on those kind of stuff, and you de-emphasize the mechanical, the numerical, the statistical aspect of goal performance. Within certain parts of the company, for example, you're an engineer that needs to keep the system up and running. There obviously have to be performance standards, which probably are pretty precise. You may want to tell that person that that damn thing have to be up 99.9% all the time, or the cost of running this machinery or that thing will be within a certain parameters. So certainly there are some very important standard and parameters for certain level of people, but probably it's more important to see or to debate and to argue what should be such goals and expectation for the higher level of people. Should a person earning 5 figures or 6 figures or whatever go running around with a bunch of long set of numbers that is so precise, when in reality nobody really knows what the hell is going to happen down the road? I mean, what kind of KPIs were set in the beginning of 2020, and how relevant any of those KPIs were by the end of 2020?
In fact, that's one of the questions that that has come up in the chat. I mean, because of what's happened, and the company doesn't meet its goals for the year, who carries the can? So,
well, technically everybody carries the can, because everybody would have shared the success. So quite often people are happy to share the success, but don't seem to believe that if there is no success, then we all should take a haircut. But in reality, it has to happen both ways.
So there are two issues that come out of this. One is, how you link the KPIs to the compensation, and should there be both plus and minus on the compensation? And if you come back to the question of, then, Azhar, are you saying that really it's what Jim Collins says, first who, then what? And if you get the right person in, then you don't have to let him worry about the what.
Exactly, that's my belief. That's how I see organizations. And obviously, there are different ways of looking at organizations.
Yep. So is this sort of and this approach? I mean, you've got both experience in an entrepreneurial organization with AirAsia and Digi when it first started, but you've also got a lot of experience in a structured organization, as AirAsia eventually became, and Maxis is, etc.
Asia never became a structured organization. You should know better than that, Anwar.
Well, there were many. There are many questions that required board approval. So I would say that's sort of structured. But So yes. So to Sukling and Unku,
Yeah.
is your culture or your board composition or your founder, does that influence the path you take? I mean, as I was saying, first who, then what. So don't worry about
Mm.
getting it all structured and detailed and all that.
Mhm.
So how does the culture of the organization influence the decision you take in terms of, which direction to go? So, Sukling and Unku.
Well, I think what I mentioned earlier. First, you must be very clear what is your business direction, and then that is manifested by the strategies. From the strategies, you are able then to define what are the performance measures in the form of indicators, and from the indicators, you will then work through what are the strategic initiatives required to make those KPIs work. Now, assuming that all this is very clear and it's a long, long process, it requiring a lot of engagement and a lot of explanation, everyone's bought in and everyone goes away and does their part. Of course, at the end of the day, you make sure everyone's aligned, and then you do the evaluation. Assuming that the company has performed, then you have to look into the area of reward management, which is where compensation comes in, as you alluded to earlier. And that's where your compensation people will have to come up with a plan in order to reward performance. So I work in a number of organizations that did a lot of work in the area of compensation. Of course, you want to reward the best performers, and you have to be very careful that sometimes in the process of doing the evaluation, sometimes the evaluation can be too generous, where the head of department, the head of division may want to reward everybody because he wants to be a nice guy. And
Okay.
then on the opposite end, you have someone who's very tough, who will only reward very, very few people. So you have to be very clear about whether that organization perform, that division perform, that department perform. Look at the numbers. That's where the data and
Okay.
the verification comes through. Reward the right people, but you can't reward everybody. I'll give you one anecdote. I had a situation, and I won't be naming companies, because I work in a number of them. I had one company that had a very major objective of going for a listing on the stock exchange. Now, there were many reasons why it didn't work out in the end, but a very big weightage was assigned to going for listing. When
Yes.
that was not achieved, they came back and said, can we replace that with another KPI? Now, this is already towards the month of November. So I was very firm and I said, no, that means we
Yep.
cannot achieve our objective. They told us, yes, you did not achieve your objective. So therefore, you got to take the hit. Very much along the lines like what you and Azhar just mentioned just now. So
Okay.
you cannot be changing the goalposts all the time. And this is where the compensation comes in, because people are very, very focused on trying to get as much on the
Okay.
bonus as they
So
can.
so let's come back to the question, that sort of Azhar prompted, that
Mhm.
um, the 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 culture of the organization, does it influence? So I get a sense from what you're saying is that you feel that structure is quite important and process is quite important, and we'll come back to that. But let me ask Sukling. So how much influence does culture, the CEO, have on which path you take? First who, then what, or let's get structured and that sort of thing.
Hmm. I like that question very much about culture, because culture is, something that people do when the bosses are not around. I mean, that's what is known to be. And I would like to quote what Simon Sinek says. When people are financially invested, they look for returns, but when they're emotionally invested, they want to contribute. And basically, that's what this whole, I mean, the discussion about KPIs or about performance. I mean, when people contribute and towards the good of the company, they perform, company performs. So culture is absolutely important in the sense that, once is what Uncle is saying is that we need structure, process, and with that, we need the right people to be doing the right things, right? And the right people have to do the right things the right way. And that's where culture comes in. I mean, what is the right way? Right way means many things to, it means different things to different people, right? And so hence the top leadership team has got to display what is the meaning of the right way, what kind of behaviors, attitudes they want to have in the organization. And I think that is absolutely key. When we say things like, we build each other up, we do not leave anyone behind, okay? And team success, is putting teams first rather than self. And all these things helps with the culture, helps with the engagement, and helps with performance. There are many research that has proven, employee engagement raises productivity and raises performance and so on. So yeah, culture, absolutely important.
So this culture, it comes from, it comes from a basic, I believe it comes from basic respect, right? So you respect people that work for you, you respect, and because you have respect, you build that trust. But nobody is always perfect or always the same way, right? So how do you deal with this on a leadership level when you say, do it my way, but I don't do it my way?
If I were to address that, Anwar, I would start by saying that from where I see it, I think that some of the things done in an organization are extremely difficult. Setting a vision, setting strategy, managing reward, managing goals and expectation, these are incredibly difficult things to do. There are two approaches then. One approach is that let's put in so much time and energy to make everything so granular, so precise, cut down all of the strategy process and take down all of the goal setting and everything into an exact science so that we have an app, we have a system, we have everything correct to the nth degree, whether it is your goal or your bonuses. The other perspective, which is probably what I would call the more organic approach, that because these things are so hard, let's not spend too much time to try to turn it into a science, and let's just minimize, let's simplify the goal setting process, let's simplify the reward process, let's simplify the vision, and that becomes your culture. When I was working with my last boss, and I worked with him on two separate occasions in two separate companies, he never gave me any KPI. He would just give me three very big expectations by saying that, Azhar, I expect you to blah, 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 and then I expect you to do this, and then I expect you to do that, and that's it. I would go and set my own timetable and maybe my own performance indicator, or how do I meet his expectation. And by the same token, I go to my direct report and I don't give them KPIs, because to me, KPIs are bullshit. They are just a bunch of lies. You think you can do 10, you start by saying, oh, I can only do 7, boss. And the boss will say that, I know you can do 10, so I'm going to ask you for 15. And then you ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, you would arrive at 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 or 13. And it depends on who's the bigger liar or who's the bigger debater and who's the better negotiator. So to me, I would start from this perspective. There's no such thing as super cool, super accurate, super good goal, and let's go for it. Let's spend time and energy doing it. I would just say that let's just go for the big thing. I'm not going to tell you you need to achieve 3.57% of sales growth. I would probably just tell you that we need to be better than the industry growth. I would not tell you that you need to achieve 7% of cost cutting, but I would tell you that we need to be in the top 10% of the industry in terms of cutting costs.
Yep.
And the same with what I told my people, because I don't know what KPI to give them. I would just tell my recruitment person that I expect us to have the best recruiting process in the entire company, in the entire industry, and you're going to come and tell me how you're going to achieve that. And then I would let you basically do it, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to rely on me, on my judgment on you, rather subjective. But if you don't have trust in me, then don't work with me at all.
So it comes back to Sukling's point that if you have the openness and you have the trust, then people are okay with that. Ungku, to your point about requiring more structure, are we able to bend you away from that and
okay,
or what drives this? I get a sense that you do think that the granular and the structure is important.
it is, yeah.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about why is it important in your experience, and why the more open, relaxed approach doesn't work.
Okay, is to get the credibility. People are very, very particular when it comes to how they are being assessed on their
Okay.
performance. People are also very particular on how they are going to be rewarded. If you are too fluffy on those two areas, you will not get the credibility. You got to be very, very clear and very, very precise. HR people sometimes tend to be a little bit too on the fluffy side, and sometimes they get into difficulties with the line management. So we got to be able to understand what works and what how they're going to make it happen. Now you talked just now earlier on about the culture bit. With KPIs is one thing. Now culture is how the organization works and all that, and it's something that's driven primarily at the management level, how they behave, how they articulate, how they communicate to the organization. I have worked in an organization that was very much financially focused to the detriment of everything else. And I have worked with an organization that was very balanced. Yes, financial performance is very important, but there are also other things. So to create a nice, good culture, you must be balanced in your approach, and that's where you need to take into account the people, the engagement of the people, the processes that drive in the organization, listening to the customer, and also listening to what your key stakeholders are asking of you. I think a balanced approach is very important. You cannot be too much
If
towards one side.
but you know, do you end up with the balanced approach where it looks good on paper, but there are no results?
The balanced approach will determine the culture that we talked about just now. If you're too much on the money side, and I've seen um, how it can destroy an organization. I have worked in one organization that got into difficulties with the regulatory authorities, not in this country, but in other parts of the country because of the focus on the financial. Financial is very important, but in their pursuit of the financial results, they did things which were underhanded, and in the end got them into trouble with the regulators. And in one particular country, the license to operate was withdrawn. So be very careful about being too much on the financial side. It has to be a balanced approach.
Okay, so like maybe we can move the conversation a little
Mhm.
bit to how do you link rewards and how do you separate between, you know, an old conversation that Azai and I have had, that you are paid to do your job. Why should I pay you extra to do your job? Um, you know, what are your thoughts? I mean, you are paid. So what's the point of having KPIs, right? I don't need KPIs. It's just that if everybody does what they do and we do well, we'll distribute the rewards.
Mm.
But don't expect rewards for doing your job. I mean, you know, in which case, what's the point of having a KPI, right? You're supposed to do this. The sales guy is supposed to bring in sales. An operation guy is supposed to increase operational efficiency. You know, a customer service guy is supposed to increase customer service engagement. So what's the point of KPIs?
Yeah. Actually, that's a very valid point. I've often wondered about that as well. I mean, you are paid to do the job, so just get the job done, right? And in terms of performance indicators and all, I guess, you know, it's a mindset thing, all right? That bonus is part of compensation. You get a base
So
pay,
okay.
and then the bonus is also part of your compensation, and you look at your total remuneration from that aspect, you know, your basic,
Yes.
bonus and benefits and all the rest of it added onto it. And if we promise a bonus, so how are we going to give bonus if we don't have some form of methodology? And I guess I'm not sure whose brainchild this was, but you know, we need to put in these performance matrices, we need to measure them, we need to get the people going, and the company achieve its success and everyone enjoys the success. And therein lies the complexity of, all right, so then how do we then reward? Who gets 0, who gets 6? I mean, who gets 0 months bonus and who gets 6 months bonus? I mean, and there we have to set up some method and some form so that people can see some exercise of fairness. I mean, when we talk about, you know, 2 persons, I mean, 2 person in a team already start thinking about fairness. If you're managing 1,000 people, I mean, you really need to have some form of something to be able to explain how this rewards mechanism work so that people understand and feel fair, but whether or not they find it fair, it's as the best that we can do. I know, so this whole reward mechanism thing, it's complex, it's hard. To Asa's point, it's hard to do, but it's necessary at times, I see, in order to kind of like, as a piece of communication to people, how they are being rewarded.
But that's the point that I made earlier on. Because it is hard to do, don't waste your time to try to drive it down so precise, so scientific, such that you can buy an expensive system. You just say that we're not going to bother about this. We're going to have a system. It's going to be relatively fair. It's going to be pretty okay. It's going to work. Yeah. And that's it. If you don't like it, go and work somewhere else. And I had no problem telling the staff that I work, whether they are C-level or whatever, this is who we are. If you don't like it, go and work with Celcom or go and work with somebody else. And I would say that to their face. And from time to time, I would allow them to go and work with the contributor. But that's how you set the culture. You don't go.
It kicks off right at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
It kicks off right at the beginning that you basically you tell people upfront, bonuses are bonuses. Don't expect bonus if you do your job. And
a bonus is a real bonus, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But people come in and say, every year DG pays 2.5 months. So when I computed what my benefits are, I computed the 2.5 months that DG was going to pay.
Yeah, you can't help that. But you can make it worse by putting so much bonus into the system such that became the driving factor. So I think you should pay people competitively, and there should be some decent bonus for great achievement. And I'll give you one example. When we were in DG, we started out with 16% of the market share. Within 3 years, we got to 33%. We literally doubled the telco market share. We went from 5 ringgit share to 30 ringgit share within 3 years. And yet our bonus was below average. We got no share option. We got nothing, even though it was a listed company. And same with AirAsia also. Look at what they achieved by not fixing and fixating on all of those things, but by just building engagement and getting people excited and then sharing some of the reward, even though the reward is nowhere near like what the banks and some of the other places are giving.
So,
thanks, Anwar. Okay, I'm the pseudo panelist here. What's in the background? So good morning, everyone. I just wanted to share the view from the other side, meaning that in my past experiences working for organizations, I've always managed the business. So I'm responsible for the P&L, the operations, and the people. So as the head of the business, I always like to be given specific KPIs, what revenues to meet, what profits to meet, etc., etc. And I work towards that. Now, this is not to say that I don't put the organization's head at some point of time, because I also have to think about the organization. So that's how I like to work. Now, in one organization recently, when those was about 9 years ago when I left, my boss assigned me a KPI which could not be measured because there was no data. Well, I wouldn't say it could not be measured, but the measurements were not in place to give me specific on whether I'm meeting or not meeting. So that's sort of a point of frustration for me, right? Because I'm doing work, but I cannot get it measured, right? So back to your point, Azza, you mentioned about giving high-level KPIs, but sometimes when you can't measure it, certain leaders may feel that it's a point of frustration, right? I'm doing something, but how do you know whether I'm doing it right? How am I going to be rewarded at the end of the day? So that's just my thoughts about. I don't know whether the other panelists have got some inputs about what I just said.
Seka, I think everyone needs to understand where they stand, and they want to know where they stand. And you need to be very clear with them. They will come to you and they will ask, what are your expectations? And those expectations must be very, very specific. And they want to know whether it's fair, whether it is measurable, whether it can be done within that time frame that you have asked them to do. And if you don't have all these things in place, then it's not much of a performance management system. At the end of the day, it will have an impact on how you give reward. Now, coming back to just that bit
So
about
Unku,
reward, which
you
everyone
tend
talks.
to agree.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So Unku, you tend to agree that there has to be specific KPIs. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I must say that if you keep people in the dark, you keep them totally unaware of how they're going to be measured, what they're expected to do, they will
Right.
come to work and
Which is my
unclear.
stand. I mean, looking at it from the
Yes.
other point of view, running the
Yes.
business,
Yes.
that's how I like it to be. But it can be different from many other people.
So I don't think the debate is between keeping them in the dark versus being very precise, keeping them in the light. I think the debate is how precise and how granular do you set your so-called goals and KPIs. And the way I see it is that if I hire a manager to work for me and I pay him or her well in the five figures or whatever, then I don't want to be telling him or her that these are the X%, the Y%, the plus or minus this or that. I would just say that your job is to go out and achieve this, and go and work on the numbers and the percentages or the whatever it is. And then we can look at it. And by the way, we look at performance in my last company every month. We would spend at least 10 minutes in what we call a pit stop, where we talk about performance every month, and that will be recorded in the system. So there's a lot of record, there's a lot of granularity, but the discussion and the principle and the culture of the whole thing is much more free flowing. And I used to work in a multinational where London would tell us everything, how high should we lift our elbow and how much we'll flex our fingers. And when you're in a multinational, don't talk about strategy because bullshit. You don't set any strategy at all. You just do whatever the headquarters tell you to do. But if you're a local company where everything is in your hand, for better or for worse, you do have to set a strategy. So quite often for most people, there is a huge disconnect between strategy. So you might just say, forget strategy. And because of that, I just go and achieve whatever number that I've been asked to
So
achieve.
it comes back to the earlier point that, I was talking to Unku, that the moment you put strategy and KPI there, you continually have this balance and people are thinking, is it really strategy to do this or is it not strategy to do this? So that produces a conflict. But, you touched on a point which we haven't covered yet, Azhar, which is how often do you check in and how often do you give the feedback? And you said monthly. What about Sukling and Unku? How often?
Yeah.
For the purpose, okay, sorry, Suplin, you go ahead.
So sorry. So I would think that at least monthly check-ins is important. And when I say check-ins, it's got to be very focused check-ins. It's not like, fluffy kind of questioning. It's like, so how are you? So what are you doing? Which part of the project is giving you challenges? What support you need from me? What support you need from the team? So these few questions, wouldn't take a very long time. But of course, depending on the response you get. And these are focused questions during those check-ins. And that's where, to Seka's point, is like, sometimes you can't measure and all that, but through these conversations, both parties know, the leader as well as the team member knows what challenges is being faced, what is, being get done, what help they need, and so on. Because at the end of the day, it's really about the place that we want to go to. I mean, strategy is all about the place you want to go to. Yeah.
So let me just jump in and ask you again. So how are these different from any management operational review meeting?
I think the conversations are the same.
So why do you need to have
reviews,
a KPI meeting? I mean, what's the point?
What's the point?
I mean, if it's going to be an operational review meeting and it's tied to KPI, does it mean that at the end of the meeting, Sukling, you are now, only 40% on this KPI and you're only 50% on this KPI and you're 70% on this KPI, which is, I think Unku might tick the boxes. So when you do a check-in, do you also have to do a tick the boxes? Or is it just...
Okay. So to
sorry,
your question,
I apologize if I jumped into.
So in those conversations, obviously, you need to ask what are the challenges, and if they are supposed to hit 10% growth for the year, and it's already October and they're only hitting 5. So for what challenges and how can we resolve that and all that? So I think the conversations of focusing on the goal is more important than, you are now at 40. So, that's bad. You better do better. And what support? I mean, as the leader, I think it's important to give support, create that kind of environment. And seriously, let's say if in 2020, the 10% is really not achievable. So what else can be done, you know? So I think these are important conversations in reviews, check-ins, and yes, record it. I mean, put it in the system, because who remembers what you have achieved in February when the time comes in December, you know? So that's the point.
Ungku, how do you manage check-ins?
Right. When you talk about the monthly check-in, that is to look at the scorecard for the department or the company. And that needs to be done on a very, very disciplined and regular basis. The monthly check-in is very important. When you talk about the individual, that's not something that you have too regularly. For me, I would do it on a quarterly basis. Then I will focus on that individual's own personal scorecard, because this individual's personal scorecard is actually cascaded from the department scorecard. So there will be a variation, because you cannot expect that person to be doing everything that the department is supposed to do. That's the scorecard of the department head.
Okay,
so check-in is very important.
So there are two questions that come up, right? One is, how do you deal with shared KPIs? And a number of people have asked that question. How do you deal with shared KPIs? So for example, you have a sales target, you close the sale, but you can't deliver the product, so you can't record the sale, so you don't make the number, right? And so then it's the sales guy says, I delivered, I mean, I closed the deal, but we couldn't deliver the product, and therefore we couldn't log the sale, and therefore, my number doesn't reflect what's sitting in the pipeline, and screwed up by the guy in operation. How do you manage shared KPIs, Sukling?
Who are you asking?
Let's ask Sukling. Sukling has got a lovely smile, and then she's obviously thought about this, and she's had to face this problem before.
Well, there's one particular organization that I was in, where we had shared KPIs. So it was an organization. So from organization profit is, let's say, 5%. So everyone has that 5%, from the clerical right up to the CEO, right? But of course, it's varying degrees of weightages, because the clerical probably would have like 5%, the CEO would probably have like 70%. And so if the 5% is not achieved, everyone gets impacted.
Okay,
somehow,
so you're saying that there's a pool that comes from the company, which is then split partly based on what your KPI is and partly what the company does.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is the science of it, right? So we talk about shared here. So let's say for a sales team and the product team that you mentioned. So both parties have got a sales targets of 10 million, for example, right? And if the sales brought in the client, but the product can't deliver, that 10 million is not recorded by finance. Okay. So
shoot the finance guy.
so everyone has a shared KPI of this sales of 10 million. And herein lies that collect of team working, right? So we help each other to succeed. So we don't say product, it's your problem, but we say product, what can we do to make this happen for us? All right, because all of us need this 10 million. So how can we work this out together? Because we are all in this together. We all have this KPI. It's sitting in our balance sheet.
But we can't all run to our kitchen and make nasi lemak to deliver it to Azhar to serve on AirAsia.
Yeah. So this shared KPI gives a sense of responsibility and accountability, and kind of like.
So that's the good thing, right? If you get the warning early enough and you can plan for it. But let's say shit happens and you didn't close the sale
all the time.
So and the marketing guy says, Sukling, you screwed up. You couldn't deliver, and therefore, I didn't get I didn't meet my KPI. How do you deal with that?
All of us didn't meet our KPIs.
Azhar?
I
What
don't
do you-
believe in shared KPIs. I think they're
Okay.
just a bunch of rubbish. They're just theoretical stuff that people write on PowerPoint to say that it brings engagement, commitment, blah, 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 blah. But in my entire career, I've never seen it work. So coming back to my earlier point, then I assume and I accept that certain things are so hard and I've never seen a good example of it being done. So I'm not going to bother with it. I would just go the opposite way. I would say that let's simplify things. Let's simplify the bonus system so that you don't have a huge variety, some people can become superstar and life-changing amount of bonus and some people suffer. No, keep it within a pretty tight band and then have other aspects of compensation that could be targeted to the super performers, could be targeted to the talented, they could be long-term thing, they could be share-based. And I set up a few share-based talent retention scheme and all that kind of stuff. So there are many dials that you can play around, as opposed to saying that I'm going to put all of my hopes on the KPI system, which is going to be tied up to this fantastic bonus system, and I have Excel spreadsheet that is correct to 7 decimal place and all that kind of stuff. In reality, they don't work. And all of my experiences, the best achievement that I've ever seen achieved are done by all of those people who are very organic, whether they are the Tony Fernandez of the world, whether the Morten Lunders of the world or whatever, going from 5 ringgit to 30 ringgit kind of share price. They're all very organic and not mechanical thing. But in the multinational thing where you take orders from London or from Oslo or from New York, then it became mechanical. They'll just tell you the number and your job is to go and hit it.
Unku, any thoughts on this?
Basically, like what I've articulated earlier, I see that definitely there is a need to have very precise, very definite KPI set for people. Then the discussion has veered towards reward management. Normally, I would like to have a separate discussion on that. My focus will be on performance. I would like to focus on performance, and then Sukling mentioned about what if you have difficulties. I agree. The objectives of the review should be to look at performance, and if you are hitting bottlenecks, how can they be removed and how can the team work together. I've seen teams having shared KPIs, and they're mostly in the product and the sales team. So if you don't achieve, that's it, my friend, you didn't achieve, and must be very clear. What I have seen in the past, however, is that many organizations tend to put process KPIs, i.e., the type of work and effort that goes into a piece of work. Now, that is not outcome based. So when you have a KPI, when you're talking about performance management, it must be outcome based. Very clearly, there must be data to support the achievement of that particular objective. But if you are having KPIs that are very only process oriented, no matter how much effort you put in, if the outcome was not clear, that's it. You don't get the.
So one of the questions is, should one have objective and key results? And I think Azhar is obviously very clearly that that's the way to go. Just have very simple, objective key results, and don't worry about all this structure and process, etc. And that's easier to implement and easier to get going.
Yeah.
So, perhaps if I could ask the panelists to talk about how does a KPI, and in their experience, have they seen a KPI drive performance? I mean, Azhar has been very clearly saying that it's who first and then what, right? So you get the right person and then they drive performance and everybody goes along the boat. But in the case of, Sukling and Unku, can you give examples of how a KPI has driven performance? Unku said about a KPI not driving performance when the company didn't achieve a listing and they tried to game the system by saying, "Oh, okay,
Replace that.
We still tried and therefore we should be rewarded." So there's an instance of gaming the system. But before we get to gaming the system, can we talk a little bit about, have you seen it work, and why has it worked? Sukling?
Okay, so setting KPIs kind of like give direction to the employees as to, you set the strategy so that people know where they're heading. And then you tell them, and in order to be the best manufacturing company, this we have to kind of like have 60% market share, for example, all right? And you set that goal of 60%, and then, you know, everyone understands it, so the employees work towards it. I think they have to understand the meaning of that KPI that we are setting as well. And what's the purpose of doing this goal? And when they set out to work towards putting their efforts to achieve that goal, and the company, I mean, when you set a goal and then you say you want to achieve 60% market share, you do reporting. The company is forced to be transparent. I have seen in one organization, not so transparent, where financials are not shared with the employees. You know, it's like only the top team have access to it. And I think it's really rubbish, because if you want people to work towards the company's goal, you need to be transparent with it. So because we have this shared KPIs and all that, started sharing the financials, started sharing where the status, the progress of the company is. So that helped the employees to say, oh, now I understand why I need to do this, because it helps contribute towards the company's objective, right? So in that sense, yes, I have seen how it had facilitated the organization to move towards their goals, because now employees says, oh, I understand, I know. And
sorry, so Glenn, just to probe a little bit, you mean that was it the setting of the KPI, or was it the fact that they had to share information that made the difference?
So when you set the KPIs to the employees, I mean, why do I need to do what you have told me to do, right? So when you tell them the meaning and the purpose, and then you show them transparently, you know, the financials and your progress and all that, then people understand, and then they can work towards it, right? So in that sense, yes, to your question, setting KPIs, targets, goals for the employees, alignment with the organization, they see the alignment, it helps.
Yeah, I'd like to just add to what Supling has said, and I can attest to that, because I'm a firm believer of sharing, especially the financials, right? And I'll go further. I've worked with organizations sometimes, even though the financials are shared, and the CEO talks about it in their monthly town hall meetings. Some people don't understand what it means, right?
Osika, you're muted.
Okay, so I'm not sure when I was muted, but I just want to go back to, I can attest to what Supling has said. I completely agree about the sharing about the financials. But my point is, sometimes, even though CEOs talk about these things on a monthly basis in their town halls, most employees still don't understand what those numbers mean and how is it tied to their roles. So there's this question here to the panelists about how have you used KPIs to inspire employees to perform better? Can you share how it's done? I just very quickly want to share what I've done before. So every month, what I used to do is to flash my P&L, right? The P&L to my managers and my engineers. I used to work for a global IT organization. And I'll go through the numbers one by one and explain to them how these numbers come about. And the conversations get very interesting, right? And I'll say, hey, boss, why are revenues down this month? Or why is this cost item up this month? And they get into that discussion about, hey, why is this or why is that? And they go about doing their projects. And in the following months, when they see the numbers going the positive direction, it builds that momentum, right? So my whole point is about sharing is very important. And number two, you need to connect the dots between those numbers and what they actually do on the ground. So that to me has worked in the past, and it could be one of my sharing to some of the questions that's been posed in the Q&A.
Is Anwar talking there?
Yeah, I also had this muted thing.
Oops, sorry, now you can hear me. Yeah, there's two mute buttons. There's one on the mic and then there's one on the screen.
Yeah.
So, you know, Seka makes a valid point about the linkage, right? So you need to share, and you also need to link performance with results.
Yes.
In large organizations, how do you do that?
Well, if I can start off, it's very difficult to get everyone together on a regular basis. So you should break it down to small groups, and it should be starting at the unit the level and then at the department level. When it comes to big organizations, the town hall, at the very least, a quarterly town hall should be done where all these things are shared. Now, the problem with having all these big gatherings, town halls especially, is that some people want to be politically correct. And in that sense, they don't challenge the senior management. Very few people are afraid to ask the tough questions to the CEO and his direct reports, and like what you just talked about just now. So I think we need to encourage more of that environment, and that's where the culture comes in. If the trust is there, you know that you're not going to be hammered by the CEO. Because I've seen one situation where somebody asked a very direct question to the CEO, he got annoyed, and after that, the person who asked that question was called up and was given a bit of a scolding by his department head. So you must create that culture. And that's why we talked about the culture at the early part. The sharing is important. The engagement of the employees are important. The communication is very important. And you can't be operating as a very aloof party in the business.
Sukleng, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think transparency is important. And to Unku's point, when when companies have town halls, they must be prepared and open to listen to what the employees have to say. And I think a lot of this is like, it's not a one-way communication. It's also, yes, on one hand, we want to share the company's results, performance, strategies, progress, and all that. On the other hand, we also want to take the opportunity to hear back from the employees. So it's a two-way. And it goes back to the performance of the company, right? So in the department head and the more low, the other levels in terms of department heads talking to their employees, the team members and all that, it's the same. It's not about me giving you the goal. It's also about, how are we going to achieve this together?
In fact, that was one of the questions, right? Yeah. Is the boss's job just to set the goal and your job to perform?
Of course not, because, it's like, we always have this department goals kind of thing. So as a department head, I also have a share of what we need to achieve. I set the kind of like strategy for the department, and I tell my teams, this is what we need to achieve. This is the game plan, all right? And we will all get there. Within that time frame. And we need to get there. So we need to be able to support each other and help each other to succeed.
Okay. So, if I could pick up in the last few minutes and talk about a specific question, in that Sukleng has already covered the issue of employee engagement. Are turnover rates a valid KPI? That we talk always a lot about sales and sales and costs being KPI, but what about turnover? Who bears responsibility for making sure turnover rates are kept down?
I kept track of every single aspect of turnover because it is all running on the cloud system. I can have a gazillion data bits on anything that happened, and we have a good or thorough exit interview, and quite often we do the exit interview after the person left, because then you're likely to get better input, better this, better that. But it is not a KPI, because when I was working in a factory 40 years ago, it seemed to be the most important goal in HR, keeping that to X% or Y%. Now you must keep track of everything that is going on with modern digital system. You can do that, but you must have the judgment to say that this is just one of those indicators that determine how good we are doing, whether we need to do more, whether we need to do less. I'll give you another example. Engagement is something that we took extremely seriously, but it was never a KPI, and I clearly told everybody in the company it's not going to be your KPI, which in many ways was a bad thing for me, because when I joined my last company, we had 67 engagement rate, and after 3 years, we had 88% engagement rate. If that had been tied to KPI, literally, I should be taking home a shitload of money, but I don't believe these are like temperature check just to tell you whether you're in the right direction, wrong direction. But then I know so many HR department having engagement rate as a KPI, turnover as a KPI, number of award that they win as a KPI. In my book, those are not relevant. And coming back to all of those things that we're trying to optimize, there's so many things which are important, and we spend so much time and energy to try to improve and optimize everything when we should be saying that this is the culture that we're going to create, and those things we're not going to bother. So culture is a choice that you make. It's not about the result of optimizing everything. It's a choice that you make to say that we're going to be this kind of company, and therefore we're willing to take the pain of not bothering too much about those kind of stuff, as opposed to saying that we're going to work like hell to make everything the best that possibly can be. The people who create great culture always make choices that maybe somebody else in the same boat will not agree to. But that's what culture is. Culture is a choice that you make.
So Azhar, can you give an example of, you talked about having 2 to 3, and as we come to try and wrap up this session, when you have 2 or 3 KPIs, what would they be? And maybe we'll go around the panel and ask the same question.
My boss would tell me that I want to make sure that we have the best engagement possible, which means that it must be better than before, and also which means that it must be better than the competitor. So it's my job to make sure that I'm keeping track of the numbers so that I can prove to him to say that yes, 88% is actually world class, and not just a number that I'm speaking to you. And
Cool.
he would tell, so those are the kind of stuff that he would tell me, and I will think about what are the things that I need to put in place to achieve those goals. But they don't get written up into one long document that I have to go and face him every month just to justify whether it's okay or not. We'll talk about it regularly, and we'll do the final judgment at the end of the year. But basically, I leave the KPI to my people. I will tell them my few expectations, and they'll come up with whatever measure that they think is relevant, and we'll discuss it regularly.
So simple is best. Ungku, are you a fan of 2, 3 only and keeping it simple, or do you still feel that process and procedure is important?
Balance, Anwar. You
How
must
do
be
you
balanced.
achieve, Ungku, let's push this a bit. How do you achieve balance? It's
Well,
like it's like the old saying of
Mhm.
if you want to do a survey and on what temperature to serve your coffee, and you do it in the US and you ask the North and they say they like hot, and you ask the South and they say they like cold, so then you serve lukewarm coffee,
Yes.
and neither the North nor the
Yes.
South want it. I
Okay.
mean, that's an extreme example of balance, right?
Yeah. Well, I talk about balance because I am a balance scorecard professional.
Okay. So
Okay. I have implemented and done the balance scorecard for over 25 years of my career in a number of organizations. In my last role, I did it to a very, very high degree. And it's all about having balance. And this is something I talked about from the very beginning of our webinar. You can't be too focused on one particular perspective. And the tendency is that many management will focus on the financial perspective. But there are 4 others that you cannot ignore. And it starts from the very bottom. It's about your people development, your learning and growth, because they will
sorry, Ungku, just
go
for
up
the
to
benefit of
achieving the performance.
Ungku, for the
Yes.
benefit of those who are listening, there's a question. So, what's the difference between a balance scorecard and a KPI and an OKR?
Well, there's a very, very
and a culture.
a lot of explanation. Okay, the KPI is if you take the balance scorecard, there are 9 steps in implementing it. The KPI comes under step number 5.
Okay.
So there are many steps preceding it that must come in, and the tendency with many people is that they just jump right into KPIs. And we talked about earlier in the webinar, you must start from where the business is going, define the strategies. You must talk about what are the objectives. From the objectives, the KPIs come in, and then you do the alignment, and that's where the individual will see whether what he's contributing, what he's doing, is part of what the division is doing, and how it contributes to the bottom line of the organization. And the balancing part comes in is because many people focus on the financials, but there are 4 other areas that you must look at. And I talked about the organizational capacity, the learning and growth. The internal processes is very important, because without internal processes, how are you going to achieve your KPIs. Then you must be listening to the customer. And then after that, all this will cascade outwards towards achieving those financial goals that you talked about from the very beginning.
So there's a question that possibly is also relating to this balanced scorecard. Does a balanced scorecard tie into a bell curve?
Okay, the balanced scorecard is a separate discussion. The bell curve is in the area of performance management for the employees. Many organizations, and I do that, I also use it, because the reality is that if you don't have some form of statistical control, you will see that many people, the curve will be trending either to the left or to the right. And then you got to relate that to the results of the organization, whether it justifies. I'm okay if the bell curve is all the way to the right. That means everyone is performing. But is that reflective of the results? If the answer is yes, I will live with it.
So
if the answer is no,
we say, boss, we all did a great job, but we lost money this year. So Kling, how would you go? Make it simple or structure or?
I don't believe in the bell curve. I think the bell curve is just like boxing people in there. So one of the things that we do is that, if the person has been rated high rating, okay, everyone gets a rating, some form of rating, right? And the really high performance ones, we actually have got a second review from the senior leadership team, because that's where we really review to see if these are really the high performance, high potential, and it's simply because of development, succession planning, development kind of stuff, because we want to know who can be that second layer and so on. So if this person performs only in the department, that's not good enough, because if you're talking about leaders of the organization, they need to be visible. People need to know them and all that. So we go through that, other committee to review. So, and that's what we do. And this bell curve thing about how to reward people and all that, just reward them according to how well they have done. I mean, just keep it simple. I don't have this bell curve thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that rather than me say, would you go simple, make it up as you go along, or would you go structure and think about how you do it? So simple or structured. Let's just, to close off this panel, let's go a couple of thoughts: simple or structured. Azhar?
I go for simple, but not necessarily making it up as I go along. Simple is our strategy. In fact, me and the CEO on the last few occasions agree that we are going to go simple because organizations are so complex and it's taking people's energy. So simple is not just because we are lazy. Well, actually, we are lazy too. But simple is driven by a strategy to say that we're going to create a new, fresh culture that you will not get anywhere else to differentiate us. If people are simple, we're going to be complex. If people are complex, we're going to be simple. We will always try to differentiate. I did a posting in LinkedIn recently talking about policy. Many people complain about policy. Most people reaction is, let's improve the policies. My reaction is, let's eliminate the policies.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's an old saying that many have used, which is 2 out, 1 in. Every time you want to introduce something, you have to take 2 things out. It's a 2 out, 1 in thing. Ungku, simple or structured?
Depending on where the organization is, how mature it is. In the beginning, if you want to put the message across that you need to be a performing organization, a very strong structure is needed. But as time goes by, the discipline kicks in, the performance comes in, you can afford to let go of the handbrake for a little bit.
Okay, so that's interesting. So rather than, I would have thought you'd go the other way. But in a small starting organization, you go simple. But you're saying that in a small starting organization, you go structure first. Okay. So Kling?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I would say simplify it, because simple is easy to understand, easy to communicate, right up to the lowest level. So just keep it simple. But has some form of framework, right? We still need to have performance that we want to measure, or performance that we want to indicate if you have done well or not. and share the success. So simple in that sense that we are still able to measure in some form.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us on this panel. We're going to take a short break till 10:45, but I'm sure we have a whole bunch of people watching online or on this Zoom channel. So I'm sure they're going to be reaching out on LinkedIn to get in touch with all of you for some private questions, I guess, that they didn't want to ask in person. But thank you again, and that sort of concludes this first panel that we want to talk about and really push the agenda of getting KPIs, but making it simple. Just get moving and get it simple. So thank you again for joining us, and we resume at 10:45 for all those who are tuning in here and on YouTube. We resume at 10:45 with two new panelists, and they're going to talk really more about the top-down approach. How do you use structure to detail? So thanks again. Take care, guys.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, folks. So we're going to take a short break of well, I think it's about 6 minutes now. We resume at 10:45. So short break, and I shall see you guys soon.
Hey, Anwar.
Hello, I'm Ingchu.
Hey, Shazad.
How are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me? And can you see me? Actually, can you
Yes,
hear me,
I
right?
can hear you. I can see you. Yeah.
Okay. Because I
How are
can't
you
see
doing?
myself in the screen. That's funny. And I thought I'm out. Let me try and see the option. Huh? I'm good. I'm good. Very busy time of the year. Absolutely.
Oof, yes. Yeah.
It was a good session just now.
Yeah, exactly. Very nice session. Yeah. Good
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah, correct. Why am I not able to see my screen? Is there any, I can't see myself on video, which is very funny. But you can see me on screen.
Yep. In your very nice red
Great.
color. Very nice.
Okay,
Yes.
just tell me if I, Shazad, so as long as I'm in the right frame, it's okay. You're not just
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. It's weird. It's really weird. I was okay just now, the earlier one, but not this one. So I guess maybe because is it? Do you see like the panel number 1, the 10:45 thing on your screen?
Yes, yes, I do.
You do, Okay, now I see.
Okay, great.
Now I see. It was the gallery view.
Mm. So are you at home or in office?
At home.
At home, okay.
We are still what we call tier 4. So in fact,
Right.
1 year we've been fully working from home.
Mm.
Total company.
Very nice, very nice.
You are back in office already?
I try to come to office because we're in the midst of changing our offices. So there's some work happening here that I just need to get involved in and see how it's going.
We should connect because I think we are also same thing, right? We are also reimagining the office, right? So I think this whole future office footprint is starting to come very closely with the whole workforce thing, isn't it? Right?
Exactly. Yes.
Imagine both side by side.
True. Yeah.
But you will still be in
Actually,
Suyan Tower?
No, actually we are shifting. We are moving close by, still within the same vicinity, but moving to a different building.
Okay. All this happening this year?
Yeah, now actually in a month's time.
It's already in
so
a
we
mist.
were really hoping for the CMCO to be lifted, which has been extended. So let's see. Our plan is mid-April.
Okay. But did you have the issue, the construction had to, your office,
Yes.
It did stop,
so
or
we
you
got delayed.
managed, it got delayed, huh?
No, we got delayed. Yeah. During MCO, you could not work.
Yeah, but then they had the second wave of the MCO, the construction had exemption, isn't it? Most of it.
Yeah, the rules were a bit vague.
Okay.
So we took the cautious approach. We said, okay, stop it. No.
Oh, okay. You were not guided by your. Okay.
No, we did try to check. They said, yeah, go ahead, you can if you want. We ended up saying no. I'd better, stop it. Yeah.
The last thing you want is Nestle in the headlines, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I probably will go down that route as well somewhere this year. We are in the midst of the business case, right? So one of the things as well is the timeline, isn't it? Because if you do any move, which is the right thing, then the all this construction renovation, right, and then your leasing and all that kind of thing. So quite
exactly
real estate world.
We had actually started the project before the whole pandemic hit us. Okay. So we were pretty much set, from design perspective.
Oh, okay.
But then with the MCO 1.0 and M2.0, the whole project got halted for a bit. But yeah, so hopefully now, fingers crossed, mid-April.
Okay.
We're really excited to move.
All the best. I'm sure I will see that in the headlines very soon. And also, I guess your centers for the COVID is very good, huh?
Yes. It's going very well.
Hi, folks, and welcome.
Hey, hello,
we thank you, Ming Chu and Shahzad, for joining us. We had a short break, and before the break, we had a panel that I guess championed the concept of keeping it simple and building really on the back of trust. I would say they're probably not all the panel members, but a couple of the panel members felt that, follow the Jim Collins principle of first who, then what. And if you get the right people in place, and you don't have a head office in London to worry about or in Europe to worry about, then you can just get on and do the right thing. So I'm very pleased to welcome Ming Chu from Unilever, who has a long career in HR, and Shahzad from Nestle. So again, a long career in HR. So in a sense, we have two industry giants who sometimes fight an ice cream war. I don't know what other war goes on. but it's great to be able to speak to people on a basis, on a personal basis, and perhaps uncover for the people who've tuned in how do you get KPIs work when you have when they're in a sense imposed on you, right, by your head office. So in the first session, we talked a lot about companies that have flexibility to put their own systems in place. Perhaps, Shahzad, you want to talk a little bit about the context of if you are a subsidiary of a larger company, what do KPIs look like, and how do they evolve?
Okay, sure. Firstly, good morning to everyone. And thanks, Anwar, for giving me the opportunity. For me personally, it's an honor to be on the stage with an expert like Ming Chu. I was really honored. The question that you've put is pretty broad. And from a Nestle context, what I can share with you is that as a enterprise which looks after Malaysia and Singapore, we do have a lot of freedom within a certain boundary or within a certain frame. So we are not in a way that it's dictated that we have to follow everything that comes from the corporate. Yes, there's a framework that exists, and the framework basically sets, I would say, some goals, some targets, as we call them, which are for a classical FMCG like us are very simple: organic growth, market share, and profitability. Yeah. So these
can
are
you
our
repeat that again?
Organic
Market
growth, market share, and profitability.
Okay.
Yeah. So these are the top 3 targets that get set for us from our corporate. And then there's a whole process of target setting, which is not a one-way street. Because there's a lot of forecasting, there's a lot of business planning that happens before a calendar or a financial year starts. So it's a two-way dialogue that happens before a target gets really prescribed. And then starts the work that we do in Nestle in all markets to cascade those targets into different teams, into different businesses, into different functions. But what I'm trying to highlight to you is not just a number that is given. No? So in Nestle, what we always do is we look at business targets in 3 different manners. No? So your targets are looked at from an absolute perspective. Your numbers have to have an absolute comparison. They have to have a relative comparison as well from a time perspective. And they also have to have a certain trend or trajectory to determine, what are you trying to aim for in your profitability or in your growth.
So if I was to summarize, the targets are really growth, market share, and profitability. And under this, the KPIs are structured.
Yeah.
So it is very much a financial health, I would say. Is that fair?
Yeah, so there are other targets as well. I'm purely speaking right now from a financial standpoint, but there are other dimensions as well.
Okay.
I'm sure we've all heard of the ESG goals. No?
Yes.
So we all have ESG goals as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a whole set of targets which get defined at the start of the year, and then starts the cascade to convert it into real KPIs that the individuals and teams then start to monitor and work for.
Okay. So, sorry, Ming Chu, could you talk a little bit about in the case of Unilever, what's sort of handed down as a sort of KPI, and how does that work?
Okay, thanks. And firstly, good morning, everyone. Really glad to be here, really sharing the stage with a good friend, Shahzad. So to answer to that, we are very similar like Shahzad, right? So I think the first and foremost, the way we are organized as a global company, I think shapes a lot of the way their KPI are being cascaded, right? Because first you are organized by region, division, and function. And when you are present in that many countries, plus we operate based on a multi-stakeholder model. There is the shareholders, because we are in the share market in both the UK and in Netherlands, and you have your customers and all that framework, right? So there will be a KPI that is overarching us globally, so that there is the same focus. And also in that sense, what we enjoy a lot is then the standardization and the skill that we have. So very same as Nestle, top line growth, market share, profitability, and that is because the nature of our product is very much fast-moving consumer goods, right? And depending on the evolution of the company, yeah, sometimes if we are building a certain, say, business model, or we are going through a certain future fit transformation, or sort of, taking your organization sort of, fit for purpose, next journey for the next 5 years sort of thing, then you add on one more. So in our case right now, largely driven by the COVID, there's quite a sort of the feel for growth, right? Re-looking at reshaping and reimagining the entire end-to-end of the business to make sure that, we are much more agile, and we sort of have resource to invest more. So I think, Shazad, we agree with us, that at the global level is quite standard and structured, super in fact. But at a local level, the markets, we are pretty much empowered to deliver these financial goals. And on top of that, of course, then you have to then sweat your own money, right? It's up to you to grow. It's up to you to now hire the number of people as long as you meet this full financial goal, right? And on top of that, of course, we also have, again, some of the other things like, social commitment goals. And this year, we all pledged that we will help 10 million youth worldwide to gain employment by 2025. So you have social commitment, you have that
the ESG stuff, yeah.
Sorry.
So does it mean that working in a multinational and inheriting a system like this for KPIs, does it make it easier? And how often is a temptation? I mean, can you talk a little bit about the flexibility you have in terms of using the system? And is there some tendency to change the system? So it's two different things, right? How are you comfortable with it? Is it fit for purpose, the system that you've inherited?
Yeah, okay. I think it's hard. So to be honest, you can't jig the system for us.
You can't what?
You can't jig the system. You can't, right? Yeah. So first of all,
you have to live with it.
Yeah, well, first we got used to it. I mean, there are certain benefits you get from standardization and scale, right? Because somebody innovates something, you just take it and you learn it, right? And on that sort of one Unilever, which is actually one of the probably flexibility that we are moving, right? Last year in the pandemic, for the first time, Unilever said, right, across the 160 markets, we will not differentiate the performance of the markets because it's hard to differentiate, right? India was difficult, China was flying, and etc. But we said we will act as one Unilever worldwide. And last year, we all had one same bonus worldwide.
Okay.
Really, there is a distinction, right? We divide by divisions, we divide by function, and market performing countries, the top 10 league table would have a bigger pot of the reward, right? But last year, everybody, regardless of how well you do, we all had one same pot. The differentiation then came down at the local level.
Sorry, I missed that. Can I just ask you, once you all had the same pot, or they all had the same payout?
One pot, one same pot.
One pot, okay.
Everybody, yeah. Unilever works on two different pots, right? So first, global to meet. So the 4 financial that we talk about needs to first meet. Because you pay dividend to your shareholder first, right? Then you distribute the reward to the markets, and you would differentiate best performing markets. So if you are doing very well, yeah, you may get a multiplier of 2 times. If you're doing less, then you get a 0.5 multiplier, right? So that's how we differentiate the markets, the countries, right? At the local level, like Malaysia, Singapore, the flexibility comes in now where the individual goals are very flexible. So we work on 3 goals. 3 goals. And like myself and my board colleague will all be responsible for these financial goals. And these are not your goals, right? They are given to you as a total market growth. So it doesn't sit in your KPI, by the way, right? This is the total business must deliver, right? And then like I then would carry, in addition, HR, I would carry different sort of targets, and they could be from sort of building a bit more the sort of long-term target. Maybe you're building a bit more of a digital first organization. Maybe it's about progressing a certain top team succession or Asian talent slate, or it could be even just delivery of a certain transformation project. So it all depends. And I would have 3 of those.
Okay.
What we add on to now individual, and this I would connect a little bit to the earlier panel group, right? If you want to drive a certain culture, KPI does make a big difference, right? So last year we added this element of well-being and development. So we asked people to demonstrate, right? How well did you take care of yourself during the whole of 2020? And how did you did your learning? And those things were in the targets, added on to the target. And when we discuss at the end of the year, the performance, not only the goals they met, but how well did they take care of themselves, and how much did they started the lifelong learning journey? And these 2 were very important sort of culture and capability that we want to for Unilever. And we saw some very good success, some very good early success already of mindset shift and behaviors.
So the KPI does drive behavior.
Absolutely.
Okay, Shahzad, back to the first question, which is, how much flexibility do you have, and how often do you feel the need to tinker with the system?
So again, I think Nestle and Unilever, because both are in the same sector, both have, I guess, a similar organizational maturity, both have pretty similar global footprints. So I think our practices are pretty similar. We also, in a way, benchmark being part of FMCG. So see, I'll give you a very simple example to illustrate the point. Let's take organic growth as a number. So, the corporate head office will say, based on, target setting discussions, that, okay, Malaysia, Singapore, for this year, you should grow by, say, 4%, for example. Yeah. Now that 4%, then we have the liberty as the leadership team of this business to decide that of the 14 different business units that we have, who would contribute how much to that overall achievement of 4%. So you have Milo, you have Nescafe, you have Maggi, you have ice cream you spoke about, and other brands, other categories. So that's where then we look at the different challenges, the different opportunities, the different innovation plans that we have, the different strategies that we have locally to get to that number. So yes, a number is shared, but then we decide locally, how do you get to that number? And like what Ming Chu was saying, our process is called annual resource allocation. So it's not just a number game, it's also determining, okay, so what's the headcount that is needed? What kind of capabilities would be needed? What kind of, training and development needs to be put in place? What kind of office setups are needed? So all those conversations then get triggered down from that target setting discussion before it really gets crystallized into a particular KPI. And these discussions, like I was saying earlier, for a calendar year start much before. So the conversations will start somewhere in June and July for the upcoming year. So it goes through a lot of conversation, a lot of brainstorming to really land at a certain number before the start of a financial year.
So the question to both of you is the rigor or the methodology of the KPI really what's giving you the results, or is it the KPI payout linked to performance that's giving you the results?
Well, it's
I give it a try. Yeah, go ahead.
You go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's both, Anwar, to your question. The structure of the process actually takes away the headache that you don't have to debate that every year. The debates are focused on, okay, so now that we know what we are aiming for, how do we get there? Yeah. So it takes away some, discussions that could be, a bit
Distracting.
abstract,
Yeah.
because distracting. So it's both actually. It's not either or, no. So the structure helps, and similarly, the process and the way we have embedded it in our organization for many years, it really helps us to create that goal alignment, as we call it, across the organization, so that everybody across the value chain starts to go behind those targets.
Okay, Mingchu?
Yeah, similar. And in fact, I just use an example to articulate that, right? So for example, we play in the common space of ice cream in Malaysia. And if I take, for example, if ice cream is the given strategic bet this year that we want to drive and locally, then you will see much more innovation flowing from the top down, and then you can use those innovation with speed to your market. That's the first thing. At the market level, what we see is a lot of prioritization, and the choices that we make every month at the board meeting and team meeting is based on the 5 strategic bets. So we will be very clear upfront at the year and every town hall. These are the 5 strategic bets, and say if ice cream is one of them, right? An example of then how HR plays a role in making sure this same KPI is given the same priority is that if we have any attrition, for example, and we would have maybe a certain governance around this year, not so much hiring from external and etc. But if there is a churn in ice cream, and that if we feel that we don't have the right capability to really fly ice cream, then we will make choices to take top talent from anywhere, plug it in to ice cream, or we may take a choice and say, yeah, for this one, we're going to make a big exception to hire a certain talent to come in. That conversation is very easy at the organization level with all functions, because we are all very clear. This is the strategic bet that we have all said that is important. So this is where I feel that whole standardization does work, because it reduces the conversation, the number of meetings, and us coming together to talk about why we should do this. But the focus is really around how we're going to get this done.
So the point is that once you have a key objective, you fix your strategy to meet the objective, right? And that makes the conversation. Is that what drives the success of multinationals? I mean, in a way, you think it's quite, I mean, if I was to say, take a step back and say, who's going to be successful in a new market? Is it the homegrown player or the multinational? And it seems to turn out most times that it's the multinational that's successful. So whether you look in the ice cream business, I don't think there are any local ice cream players. Or if you look in the coffee business, or you look in the prepared foods business. So why, is your process or your system that's so powerful, or is it your brand that's so powerful? And where do KPIs play in this? Do you just come in and say this is a competition, and the local guys say I don't know there's a competition?
Yeah. Interesting one. If I can go, Shazad, I'll just take that one first.
Yeah.
For me, there's 2-part answer to your question, Anwar, right? What we have learned, what has worked for us, and what we are thinking for the future, right? What has worked for us, certainly, right? This whole standardization definitely helped, right? And there's this notion that I said that you can only have standardization when you have a big mothership. So I would say multinational like us are blessed, right? We have a big mothership. We call that the Unilever Global Mothership. When you have the big mothership, and we have seen even during COVID time, right? We didn't have to worry, for example, about protection of jobs, because there would be resource in the bigger mothership, right? You may have 1 or 2 countries that is in trouble, but the big mothership will bail you out. An example of that is, we operate in Myanmar, right? And we all know the military coup that's happening, and Unilever is still operating there today. And the town halls we are having with people, it's, we are here for you, and we will protect life and livelihoods and jobs, right? So I think the standardization gets paid off through this, mothership, right? It always have the resource. It has the R&D capability, that, maybe local companies may not have. So that ability gives us, in whatever time crisis, right, it still gives us the ability to move forward. We may not be able to move that fast, right? So I think to that question, I would say it has worked for us in that sense. Now, moving forward, a lot of learning from pandemic, I must say, is where we now see that all these KPI, these 4 financial goals remain for the year. But some of the goals of all our leaders will need to change maybe on a quarterly or a half a yearly. So now our goals are half a yearly. All right. Our connect session to review is very often we say always on conversation. You review all the time at the board level. Definitely, we look at it every 2 weeks, to be honest. But the reason for that is because we have seen the world has changed so fast. In our business, stock resilience is a big thing. So I don't have the luxury of Shazad having his big mega factory everywhere in Malaysia, right? A lot of my shampoo, comes from Thailand. My Belgian chocolate, by the way, Magnum and Cornetto comes from Indonesia. And the COVID has really hampered our business resilience in that sense, and the borders really makes the stocks resilience very difficult. So in those situations, even marketers have the best innovation, sales have the best customer plan, but if you can't bring the stocks into Malaysia, then you could pivot your plans. So this is where we are seeing now the value that we now tweak at a market level, team level, that we all reprioritize to really, whether it's flowing talent to value or flowing our resource just to make sure we get the stocks into the market.
Yeah. Shazad, the perspective of the why does the multinational win, and how do KPIs play into this?
I think size and scale matters. Like Meng Chu was saying, being associated to your mothership, your expertise and insights, could come to you. But I think it's not a question of multinational or a local company. I think it's a question of which company has a better rigor, a better discipline, and a better focus. Because in some segments, you can also find companies which are local and are doing very, very good, and they're giving very tough time to FMCGs or multinationals. I mean, I can quote you example of Indonesia, for example, Maggi noodles, or even for that matter, Knorr or Knorr, they are not the category leader. You have Indomie, which would really give us a run for our money.
They got they got a jump start on the taste, as did Tongkat Ali in Malaysia.
True, yeah. So I think it's a few factors that come together. The power of your brand obviously helps. Yes, your maturity as an organization helps, but at the end of the day, it's how nimble you are, how focused you are, how disciplined you are in your planning and in your execution. As the old adage is, you take 90% of your time to sharpen the saw. So I think in multinationals, that's, I think, a competitive advantage, that we spend a lot of time sharpening that saw before we go out and strike with it.
Okay, yeah. So and that's reflected in the rigor of, as you're saying, the KPI, let's not tinker with the system. Have either of your companies tinkered with the system, and how often have they tinkered?
So for us, actually, we are starting to now tinker ethically, this year. When I said, it's that we make choices to say we have to pivot, and exactly as Shazad example, right? The local players are really sweating us, right? So the famous example, again, I remember last year, February, sanitizer, where we play Lifebuoy, it's just 1 million market size in Malaysia. In April, just a month and a half, it became a 10 million business. And Unilever just had only like 200,000 share of the market. We lost out. And in that 1.5 months, we saw 100 local company able to produce sanitizer, and we were still busy trying to get the stocks from the custom, right? So I think we have to. I think there's a bit of that balance. I still think that we now, as we go forward as a multinational, because it's our ability, as what Shazad say, right? I think agility is going to be the #1 name game for us, right? How agile can you be at a team level, and eventually, I think at the enterprise agility level? And also, again, is how fast can we, react to the consumer, right? And the consumer are getting very, very discerning. And e-commerce, the opening of e-commerce is also not helping, because people can buy from anywhere. They don't from you, right? So I think this changes, or rather COVID being the disruptor first and now accelerator, is forcing giants like Unilever to change, right?
But Ming Chu, those changes are really more on the supply chain. I mean, the favorite phrase, I think, all of last year is the supply chain is broken. But besides supply chain, I mean, one of the things that I get very strongly from listening to both of you is HR is an integral part of the business operation. It doesn't sit apart. I mean, both of you talk about numbers, talk about competition, talk about supply chain, etc. Why is it that in your organizations, HR is so embedded into the organization? It's not a peripheral.
Shazad, you want to go first? I'm just conscious I had a go just now.
Okay, no, thank you. I think, but I'll steal something from you, Ming Chu, what you said earlier. I think it's the overall culture of the organization, no? And I guess through hit and trial, through many decades of our existence, I think the company has realized that, not all the things that count can be counted, no?
Yeah.
And that's where HR really comes in to play that role of a sounding board, of, an arbitrator in some cases, or, a mediator to really manage those discussions. No, I think we are much forward in our journey as HR function, from a simple, administrative function where we would print out target letters and give it to line managers, that, okay, Mr. Business Manager, these are your targets for the year. No, I think we have an equal stake, like what Ming Chu was saying earlier. I don't have any HR targets or HR indicators linked to my bonus. My bonus, 90% of that is linked to business. So I have to be an enabler to the business. Yeah. And that's what I bring back into my team, to talk to them, to say, look, guys, sales are not happening. And if we are bureaucratic in our, benefit admin, for example, just imagine the time lost that it creates for an ordinary salesperson. So how can we make our system efficient so that our salespeople are more productive, so that our factory colleagues can be more faster in their, time on shift, no? Because they work in shifts and all. So I think it really helps to create that conversation if you are on that table. And I think in our organizations, we have that ability, or we have that presence in those right forums to make the presence of HR felt.
Ming Chu, so is it something
just yesterday?
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, just to steal. Just yesterday, you were talking about tinkering the system. So just yesterday, we were having a bit of a discussion in our leadership team that, look, should we look at the elasticity of our targets? We cap at a certain number because we don't want to push, undesired behaviors. No, in FMCG, you can very easily load the market, as we call it.
Yeah.
You can sandbag
stuff the channels. Yeah.
Exactly. But we don't want to do that because obviously, always there's another year ahead of us. So that was a good discussion. Some people in our leadership team were saying, yes, I can grow more, so give me more bonus. And some said, no, I cannot because my category is struggling. And then I had to, mediate to say, look, yes, but let's understand our principle. Let's understand who we are and how we operate.
So it comes from that your core, So it comes very much from the core value of respect in the culture of the system, right? So Ming Chu, is it your personality that got HR aboard a seat at the table, or if it wasn't Ming Chu, would somebody else also have a seat at the table, or it's fit to person only?
You are asking me a very difficult answer, right? Well, I won't say whether it's me or not. I think leadership plays a big role, right? For anything to happen, I really feel is the leadership, right? I mean, Shazad and the earlier panelists said, right, you can have anything in your company, but the people, the leaders are the one that's going to make it alive. So we always have this debate, right? Should we top down, should we whatever, but you can, HR can introduce anything. But if your leaders don't carry the talk, don't show, you know, we talk a lot about culture. For me, I always tell my people, culture is very simple, right? What you say is what you do. You talk about, you know, wanting to be safe, to speak up. Then please, all board directors, right, in town hall, pigeonhole, whatever comes, you stand there and you answer, right? And it's not about, oh, we should shut down pigeonhole because, you know, people are, you know, getting very difficult. So I think for me, leadership plays a very important role. You certainly, what you say and what you do consistently shapes the culture of the business. And I think this may sound like Shazad and I had a coffee and we premeditate, you know, all these sessions, right? And I think HR, specifically leaders, right, needs to really show that you are a business HR leader. You are not a HR leader, right? And I think that word business HR leader is very big because, you know, you need to not just do transactional. The transactional are important because that's our fundamental in HR, right? I mean, hire in time, pay people in time and all that. These are your fundamentals. It's like you have to eat every day. But being a business HR is about, do you deliver value and how do you create impact for the business, right? So and a simple thing as it can start with an ice cream goal target, right? What can HR do when there's a crunch where we need to battle ice cream out there? For heaven's sake, don't push people to run, to complete the training. You may say, just take a break these 2 months. We're not going to do the training because people need all the time and energy to go and fight the battle in the marketplace, right? And then we talk about in HR, do things that addresses people's pain point and do things that really flow talent to where the business needs. So, you know, I was profoundly energized. Again, COVID last year, I think many of us have seen companies laying off drivers. Secretaries didn't have work. And I was very profoundly surprised because Malaysian usually is quite scared, right? I am not going to say I have no work. Then people say I have no work and I will be out soon, right? So we started this thing to say, look, there are many parts of our business. First, we cannot hire. Unilever globally say we cannot hire. Many parts of our business is compromised from capacity. So the brand managers that's doing some activation doesn't have enough hand and feet. So secretaries were deployed to do some of the, our drivers were deployed to go and do merchandising because we had a lot of merchandisers that were back in hometown and they couldn't travel because of the interstate travel, right? So our drivers went and did some merchandising, right? And then we had a lot of female managers, the children were at home. And then, you know, children cannot tell that mommy is working or daddy is working. They just sit on your lap, right? And you can't focus. So we had about 20 employees put up their hand and say, let me be the virtual child giver. So we had this program set up in 7 days, 0 cost. 20 of people volunteered. And they looked after, you know, about 40 kids throughout the pandemic, just so that our managers could just sort of ease themselves into the work from home with kids around. That was a huge mindset change that we saw. And I think these are the things that we want to see more and more happening, you know, at a local level.
So it's quite an innovative experience. Shazad, since we sort of segued into pandemic and how the pandemic impacted, what was the impact on you and how did HR respond?
So we have 6 factories in Malaysia, 2 more in Singapore, huge organization footprint. Obviously, because of lockdowns, our people had issues even to get to the factory. Then once they're in the factory, we had to make sure that we put in place all the proper segregation requirements to make sure that they stay safe. So for the last year or so, me and my team or my HR business partners have played more of a role of health and safety manager rather than HR managers. You know, we have been making sure that our people are equipped. First of all, they're coming in, then they are equipped with all the right PPEs. Then they are properly in their cocoon or in their bubble, so that proper segregation happens. All with the notion of making sure that the operations keep on running. And you know, like I said, 5,000 employees in Malaysia. We have a positivity rate of 0.03%. You know, so which is in all the industrial clusters, we've seen a lot of issues in the news. No, but luckily, touch wood, we've done very well. So I think you know, the pandemic called for you know, feet or hands on the ground. No, that you have to be with the team. Yeah,
Yep.
and you have to make sure that, you know, things are running, the operations continue to flow.
And did you also
So a
have
lot
the
of
experience of cross-deploying people? I mean, moving people around?
Oh yes, yes. Some of the people, you know, for example, our Nespresso boutique in Gardens, Mid Valley, was closed. You know, so yes, what do you do with them? Do you just leave them
I
at
took a
home,
selfie
or
there
do you?
twice to get the loyalty.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for
So
that.
what do you do with
So
those people, right?
So yeah, so you give them some tasks, no? Quickly onboard them and train them first, so that they can, you know, quickly add value, and then make them, you know, loan them to another team, so that you know, they contribute.
So it's
So
interesting,
quite a
right?
few examples. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So if we come back, before we come back to the KPI issue, there's one question on the Q&A about timeliness. You know, how do organizations like Nestle and Unilever deal with timeliness and, you know, with clock ins, clock outs sort of thing, I guess.
So we may be very radical, but I think in Malaysia, we are one of the much more flexible. So flexible working for us started many years ago, about 6 years ago. And it's just not work from home. There is no clock in, clocked out. But of course, I'm saying this caveat in a non-production environment, right? So in a manufacturing factory, you will still need a clock in and clock out because of the shift arrangement, right? So we 6 years ago, we have started already no punch in, punch out. You work at whatever time, and you can also just sort of, work certain days, and then you can take time off. So, but all these were unwritten rules. Now, after the 1 year pandemic, and I think this is also a little bit of a segue, your earlier question, right? You know, HR. So I think one is business HR. The other thing I think HR needs to change is we need to be leading change during this period, right? So the flexibility that our people are asking is huge, right? If you run survey every month in your company, believe me, you will see incremental confidence that people say, I'm comfortable to work from home. Before that, they are not, because they now see the enjoyment of not having to travel, the traffic time you save, you can do much more. Of course, we all work longer hours, right? But the confidence level of people to say they want to work more from home and more flexibly is getting higher and higher. So I think the question to HR is, as we all start to think about coming back more with vaccination and all that in the country, I think it'd be interesting to see the industry, right? Where will all of us go very rapidly to this overall flexible working, and even thinking about just maybe a hybrid workforce, a hybrid workplace, hub and spoke, your office just a little HQ. You may have working space as a satellite office, people working, half your population working from co-working location, some working from home, that kind of thing. So, and that I fear as well, because I don't have answers to how do people lead? How do you get teams to connect? How do you manage KPI? How do you manage productivity? It actually freaks me out, to be honest. But I know we have to go down that track. And I think that is where HR needs to lead the change in this period. Go for it.
Shazad, timeliness, and how do you guys deal with it?
So it's pretty similar in our office environment. We don't track time at all. Very flexible. Right now I'm in office. There's only one person on our floor where there's seating capacity of 45. I'm very sure my team is working from home. I don't have to chase them. I know I will have my review next week. our weekly review, and then we will talk about things which we had to focus on, any challenges, any issues, any support that they need, any errors, mistakes that might have happened. So those things, coming back to the topic of KPIs and reviews and all, I think the system, brings them up automatically for a conversation to happen, and then, actions can then be taken to fix
So the
those
check-ins
issues.
on your side with the KPIs are weekly, are they? And so the question is really, how often do you check in on a KPI, and how different is a KPI check-in to a management review? How
So very transactional work is a weekly review. As you go a bit more transformational, then the shelf life of that review becomes a bit longer, monthly or quarterly, or even 6 monthly, depending on the nature of the KPI that you're looking at. But pure classical transactional work is a weekly review.
Okay. And how does it log to your KPI? How do these reviews, how do they fit into your KPI?
Yeah, actually, so I guess Unilever would be something very similar. For the last decade or so in Nestle, we've had something that we call goal alignment, where we have pushed the concept of a measure tree. So if you have a certain goal that you have defined, then you break it down into different individuals, different teams, that how do they all play their role on a daily basis or on a shift basis that, comes together to get to that measure or that KPI that you're trying to aim for. So that system has been very well embedded into the way we work or the way we operate. So you don't really have to chase for it. It just automatically comes to you, as part of the goal alignment process.
Dashboard. Okay.
And then the dashboard, yeah. And then you can get to, very quickly look at it. I remember when I joined 20 years ago, I used to work in a factory. Back then, the factory manager used to ask for a monthly report on KPIs. And the day before that was a mad rush just to get the report ready because the boss wants to see it. But now the systems and technology help us that KPIs are pretty much real time.
Okay.
So all you need is a SAP report, and you have it, and then you don't have to have the headache of, okay, I need to churn an Excel report or I need to do this. You click a few things in your Power BI and you have it, no? And then you just focus on the problem solving aspects of it. That, okay, this is the trend, this is the absolute figure. What do we do? And I think that's what the real focus of a team should be, that you have a problem, how are you going to fix it?
Mingju, how different is...
No, very, very same as Shazad. We have a big data center sitting in London, and our KPIs are dynamic, real time. So you have a management reporting dashboard that you can just click onto the system self-service, including if you are going out there in a trade visit, you can just go in there and you see also even your stocks level and your customer service level, that sort of thing, right? So we got a big house of that, but I think the challenge is getting our people familiarized, right? Even I find Power BI is very difficult, to be honest. So that is in place to help us to look at things. But I guess then also for us it's pretty flexible when we have all this report, right? So I would say KPI, there's this high level KPI. There's this also lower level KPI, right? So the high level KPI would be the sort of financial goals that we talk about. So this will all be in the radar on your monthly board meeting and your, bi-weekly operations meeting. And all these are driven from the tool, right? Then there is this, maybe I call that the lower level, right? So this could be for supply chain, could be a service level KPI. For sales, is the numbers that you have to bring in every month, right? And so forth. For HR support function, there will be some things you will want to deliver on a month-to-month. To be honest, we don't track your sort of that KPI like, every time, but our team connect every week, right? There'll be
every week.
Every week, all our teams connect every week, right? So, and that translate down to the board. So every Monday is my chairman and us. Every Tuesday is me and my team below, they would also have some rhythm. So there's a rhythm now in the connect session. And then you do another connect on the same week as well. And you don't talk about anything but just how are you? How was your week? What are you going to do this weekend, kind of thing? Because we have learned that the well-being is very important to get people settled for the next day, right? So we do that quite flexibility now. But in your, we still then continue at a function level HR. I have my function HR leadership team meeting every month. I then take the strategy, right, on a quarterly basis and just sort of see where we are. But on a month basis, I review the progress and I also discuss, the priorities that we have set, right? Because you may have, your strategy will have quite a number of priorities, and within the priorities are actions, right? I review the actions and the priority on a monthly basis, but I review my strategy overall HR on a quarterly basis. My weekly operations check-in allows me to, get a sense where people are struggling, and where they need a bit help to pivot. Otherwise, they are fully empowered to run, to deliver. So I don't track what time you work and etc. But we have a rule, please don't have any meeting between 12 to 2, because now I have to rise as well, right? I lost my maid during the pandemic. And as a company, we said 12 to 2, no meetings. Meetings finish at 6. You're not obliged to attend, and don't organize any meeting, that kind of thing, right? And then that is actually helping our people to be responsible for their own KPI. So our experience is don't track people, don't tie people, empower them, but have some mechanism to make sure they are plodding along.
One question is, how do you assign, do you, the question is really from the floor, do you assign KPIs to admin type people?
You have to.
Okay, and what's an example of a KPI to an admin type person?
So an admin person could be someone, say so if they're doing something that is input and output flows into another process chain, right? So example, supply chain, customer service, you would receive the orders coming from the customer, right? I mean, that part we haven't automate, right? So all the orders are taken on a palm top. It flows into the system. You have to have a bit of that sign-off invoice. The invoice comes to our system, so we just have to input in to our system. So those things are time-bound, right? Because if you don't get that 2,000 line of invoice into, then you will not have your dispatch in time. So there are still those time-bound sort of operational delivery that you put in. If I take example of, say, another admin in say, sales function, right? There will be people that looks after the dashboard of our perfect store. How well have you made sure your stocks and you're dressing up very well, right? So those, we will make sure that they fulfill the perfect store KPI, say 98% level. Right? So they get that 98% level on a week and a month, then their bosses will make sure that they are able to deliver that. If there's any problem, then it's the leader's responsibility to help them and coach them to deliver, right? So they do have that, but that is making sure that they meet a certain sort of service level commitment to our customers, or certain standards that Unilever wants to drive for our customers.
A question too. So it comes back to the point that Shahzad, I think, made earlier, which is the MNCs have a rigor and a focus, and everything is looked at from delivering a common goal, right? So you don't spend time worrying about, is the data correct? Should we use a different system? Should we modify this, etc.? Can we talk a little bit about how you have a pot that's paid out in compensation? How much of that is a function of your individual performance, and how much is a function of, is it individual, shared, or company? Can you speak to that question, Shahzad?
Yeah. So again, we are, any organization for that matter is a pyramid. So the higher you go, the more of your goals become shared goals. Yeah. So it could be shared between an organization, like for example, Nestle Malaysia, Singapore, or even can also be shared with the whole region of Asia and Africa. So it really depends on the position that you have in the organization. The higher you go, the more shared goals come into play, because your influence also is bigger. At more junior levels, because you're more transactional in nature, you're focusing on one particular deliverable. So then it's more individualistic or team-based in nature.
Ming Chu?
Exactly the same.
Okay. So Ming Chu, Shazad you mentioned he'd been in Nestle for 20 over years. How long have you been in Unilever?
Same. So
20
this
over years?
23rd year.
My gosh, both of you are 20-year veterans.
Yeah.
So over 20 years, you must have served under different CEOs or country heads. Do they all take the same view on KPIs, or does it vary?
So I've been privileged to serve under actually as a board member, right? 10 CEO,
10 CEOs. Wow.
Yeah, and they were, of course, not only Malaysia, Singapore, because I also had the Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, yeah, and Myanmar had a CEO, so all the markets would have, right? I would say the sort of commitment to the KPI is firstly global. So all the CEO of Unilever are tied with one same KPI, which is the 4 financial goals, right? Then the way they play emphasis on each of the KPI is where I see it differs on CEO.
Okay.
So I speak on HR, right? I loved when I get a CEO who's a natural talent catalyst, right? Who sees people and product equally the same. I also have sometimes CEO which are the driven, are more financial sort, but they are really very good achievers and they do very well financially. Then you get a little bit less support sometimes in terms of, the other things that is not so financial. Then you get some CEO which is a bit more, I want to build long-term, right, for the business, and I'll take a bit of my resource to do that. And there'll be those that, no, I want to just deliver today. So there has been a little bit of, I would say, differences. And I do understand the position sometimes because Unilever, to be honest, most of our CEO are expats, right? And as much as they carry the larger umbrella of delivering, I mean, they have the responsibility to first deliver in the market, because if you don't deliver in the market, how are you going to pay salary? How are you going to keep people on the jobs? How can you remain the employer of choice? Yeah. So they do have a very clear responsibility to deliver today, right? Then the question on what is their appetite for tomorrow will depend on different people. I mean, my current CEO is a Brazilian. He's operating in the last 1 year from Vietnam. He can't land into Malaysia yet. So I'm seeing him a very digital person, right? So lots of appetite in digital, lots of appetite for talent, doing the purpose bit, So I quite like it, when you have that combination. Okay, I think we can do a bit more for Malaysia, just not the financial delivery.
Cool. And is it a little bit driven by their their reward system, or no? It's just a personal thing.
I think at a very senior level, honestly, at a board, C-suite level, really is beyond the reward. It's beyond the reward, and I say that is because I mean, somehow there's this culture in Unilever, right? I don't know how we achieve it, right? I mean, if you ask me, like, why did you stay 23 years? I can only say that it's a company that I have experienced a lot of goodness, a lot of gratitude in this company through its leaders and its people, right? Somehow there's this unspoken culture, right, that we are like a family, and all the C-suite level people, when they go up there, they really work very hard, not just to deliver the numbers, to keep people on the payroll, but really what can we do better for the business every day, every year kind of thing, right? And even on years that you do so well, the earlier panelist said, right, I think DG, right, example, you grow so well, but if that year Unilever Global did not grow and you get really a poor bonus, we all don't complain. We complain a day, and next day okay, let's start again. So I'm seeing that a lot in the leaders in our organization.
Okay. Shazad, some comments from you on the differences in leadership and how they impact or how they use KPIs?
My learning, I'll start with my learning. My learning over my career has been that KPIs are all about relationships. And a real leader is someone who understands the interdependencies that KPIs create in an organization and is then able to leverage those interdependencies and make the organization move forward. I'll give you an example in simple terms. In all organizations, we have vertical layers and we have horizontal silos. Yeah. For an FMCG, a classical KPI is customer order fulfillment. You manufacture in a factory, you put it into a truck, which is managed by supply chain or logistics, and then your sales or colleagues would sell it, and then you will manage or measure your overall order fulfillment. Now it's a clash between three functions, and these three functions generally in Nestle are heavyweights because they control a lot. No, so a good leader is someone who is astute enough to see how those interdependencies work and how or when to pull and when to push, and someone who can really look at not just leading KPIs, but create a mix of leading and lagging, not just financial KPIs, a mix of cost KPIs, people KPIs, quality KPIs. So I think that's a real differentiator in the most progressive leaders that I've worked with, that they really understand it. And they will not just look at it in a myopic manner. They will take a bit of a bigger view, a bit of an organizational or an institutional view on how things should be driven.
Shazad, can you talk a little bit about the leading and lagging KPIs? So and you described KPIs in a much broader context. So they are outside of the three areas that we open the discussion with, which is growth, market share, and profitability.
Yeah, so again, that's part of that goal alignment methodology that I shared with you, that, how do you set KPIs and then cascade it across the organization? So for example, for us to get that 4% growth, the whole value chain has to work seamlessly. Yeah? If you don't have product availability, obviously, then you cannot sell. And manufacturing, logistics, and sales, the first thing is to make sure that the product is available on the shelf before the offtake with the consumer can really happen. So that's how a growth KPI is then broken down into, so what is our customer order fulfillment? How will we make sure that we deliver on time and in full? You don't want your distributors to open a pallet and see, oops, I had ordered Milo and I've got Nescafe. So how do you make sure that that happens seamlessly when you are moving tons and tons of volume every day? Yeah, so it has to happen very seamlessly.
Okay.
And this is where that goal alignment across functions come in, and they look at different ways and different means of what to look at. Actually, sometimes the internal debate in our companies, especially when newcomers come in, they complain that, look, in Nestle we have so many of these indicators, and we don't know what to look at. And most of the times that's what we end up telling them, that, look, you just answered it yourself. These are indicators. You just need to know which indicators matter when.
Okay.
Yeah?
So
you need to know. Yeah,
it's an interesting point that we also should cover, which is, how do you get the right people, or do you get everybody, and you make them? Do you get the right people, or do you make them right? As far as the KPI is concerned.
That's a centuries-old debate, no?
It is. But and how you answer really, perhaps in a way, reflects on your experience.
I think at the end of the day, it comes down to how your organization brings them, onboard them, and brings them along.
That's interesting.
So nature and nurture is always there. I mean, there are different schools of thought, but how do you make sure that they work in your culture with the people that are around them and then can produce results? That to me is the real differentiator.
So at which level are they introduced into the KPI, and who walks
them
through it?
Okay. At all levels, even a simple, manual task of of a operator working in a factory. They, which is a very, very transactional job. You are just picking cartons and putting there, no? You're just packing them. They have their carton case fill rate. How many cases have you filled in your shift? So KPIs are to every level, like what Ming Chu is saying, even administrative jobs, you would have a KPI. KPI might not be a number as such, but it could be a service level agreement that, you receive a request from a staff to manage a certain benefit, or you get a call or a query to resolve, a service desk issue or for somebody's IT complaint. There's an SLA for you to follow through. Yeah.
Okay.
So everybody has a yardstick. And
Yep,
like I said,
yep.
these are indicators for us to know how are we performing.
Ming Chu, do you want?
Yeah, I want to add on to that one, Anwar, but more around, so I agree with Shazad, but more around how do we make KPI meaningful for our lower level staff and all that, right? I mean, how do they see that what they do connects to the larger KPI, right? And this is where, our journey has brought us to, you can communicate anything you want in town hall, but do people understand? The reality is a lot of our lower level staff may not understand. So what we do now is we try to simplify what this KPI means, right? I mean, like in HR, I have one big, a bit more longer term horizon, which is around build a culture of lifelong learning.
Okay.
Culture of lifelong learning. How does that bring alive to my secretary or to the reception, and all that kind of thing, right? So we try to then say, okay, this lifelong learning and etc. If there's one word to describe, how would you feel it? So in my HR strategy, I break it down to capacity, capability, and culture. So lifelong learning would be in the area of capability, right? Whatever we do in there, it adds on to the whole capability umbrella, right? So to my secretary is to say that you have a big role to make sure whenever you organize the room for training, that when you order the meals, and that whatever that you do, make the experience of the training flawless, seamless, and delivering employee experience. That people will find going to training is so easy, right? The food is always on time, the food is very nice and things like that. Then people coming off on the training, they feel good, right? And then more and more people will enjoy our training, right? And therefore, capability could go up. So you try to make them feel, clear how that organizing a meal in time, getting good food in will help in the larger strategy and KPI. I hope that sort of helps.
Is dealing with KPIs, the rigor, the structure, is it tiring?
Very. Because it's how do you make that KPI alive, right? How does it give meaning to people and how do they know how to deliver the KPI, right? That is so tiring because it requires, line managers to be almost good at it, very good at it.
Okay, yeah, Seika wants to jump in. So let me,
Okay.
there he is.
Yeah. Use this?
You can use yours.
This one?
Yeah, you can use yours.
Oh, hi Shazad, Ming Chu. I was in the background. But I just want to add on to what Ming Chu has said by giving you an example, right? So we worked with an organization where we're looking at the collections team, the collections team that chase for payments. So their KPIs was very basic. Okay, you make 10 calls or 20 calls a day. And what happens, it becomes very monotonous. I call the customer says, I'm going to pay a month later. Oh, it's okay. I'll call another customer, right? So what they did was they reframed the role by telling them that how important collections was. It goes into cash flows. It goes into whether we're able to meet our payments, whether we're able to speak salaries and all that. Now that they understand or understood how important that role was, it translated from an operational role to a sort of a business role because I understood that, hey, my job is so important because if I don't collect cash, it's going to affect cash flow and all that. So that is something, it turned out from a very mundane organization, mundane role to a very meaningful role. And they always look forward and understood that, hey, my job is important and this is how it connects to the bigger scheme of things. So I just want to add that point.
Thanks, Nika. Thanks, Nika. Yeah. No, so I mean, you know, I must say that having seen and heard from all of you, the complexity and the rigor that an MNC brings to KPI is something to be admired. You know, it is. I must say, I started this morning being a fan of flexible and simple KPIs. And I think listening to the two of you and the rigor and the success at which this complexity is delivered says a lot for it. And that accumulation, as you say, of the mothership, the learning at the mothership level is formidable. You know, if you have the mothership and you have the right people, then you do have a system that can really deliver KPIs and make KPIs work. So, you know, I'd like to sort of thank and Shahzad and Ming Chu for joining us to close off this morning. And we started the morning talking about having simple and broad objectives as opposed to a rigorous system. And in your session, we talked about how a rigorous system can actually be quite effective. And for a lot of companies that are listening and a lot of Malaysian companies, I hope that there is some takeaway that they can bring to their own organizations on how they make KPIs work, and also, you know, pick up on the fact that HR can have a seat at the board, and HR is a business partner, which is something perhaps lacking in local companies. In local companies, HR is more a function as opposed to a business partner. And it's interesting to see that in MNCs that movement has happened, that they are no longer a function, but they are a part of the business. So I'd like to thank you both. And I also, while we're waiting, would like to launch a poll. So I hope that everybody who's participating will see the poll pop up and answer the question. So thank you very much, all of you. Let me go to a holding screen while the poll runs. And we'll keep the poll on for the last 5 minutes of the session. I think we have covered all the questions. Oh, there's one question that popped up. Can you have unusual KPIs like commitment, that commitment or competency? Can you put them into the mix for a KPI?
I presume the question is probably on when we said commitment, is it a commitment on what? On
a person's commitment. So, I mean, can you judge how committed they are?
Okay. My experience so far is, you know, it doesn't work that way, and it would not have meaning, right? We would measure, for example, in this case, right, the commitment or the effectiveness of a person and a leader, and more so, I think the easier example is a leader is through a very robust 360 degrees feedback, right? So all our leaders goes through that every 18 months to make sure that their development is aligned with how they are impacting the teams that they lead, right? Those are very clear measurement that we then use to say, and for some people, I can tell you, like leaders, it's as simple as, right, the feedback is they are not clear on their goals and strategy. They're not clear, right, on their communication. And then you ask the leader and say, no, I've been communicating, you know, every meeting and all that. So that becomes then that you need to just tweak a little bit. What is it you're communicating? how you're communicating, what is it your people need more from you or less from you kind of thing. And those usually will solve the job. That I measure as, you know, if then periodic, you see that shift in the leader, able to now communicate better and relate better. I see that as a commitment of the person truly to want to be better and want to make, you know, the team better.
Okay. Shahzad, just to sort of round off, you know, why do structured KPIs and why does the rigor work?
Why does it work? Wow, that's a tough one. Why does it work? I think because it has somehow ingrained in our DNA, and people are committed to it. We have seen the result of this time in, time out, year in, year out. And I think people have learned that, look, this thing works. So instead of debating about it or trying to re-engineer it, might as well focus your energies on things that actually matter. You know, like I said, KPI is just you know, to measure the health of your relationships. You know, so focus on actual problem solving, actual issues that the business wants you to work on, rather than this number or that number.
Ming Chu?
Exactly this. I would think, right?
This comes from two people with 20 years in the same company.
Well, I say that with a lot of conviction, and I fully echo Shahzad, because that's how things are in Unilever, and it has worked.
Yes.
But we could be better. Learning from all the changes. Yes, that's where we are.
Yeah. So thank you very much, guys. I'm going to hang on for a couple of minutes just to see the poll come in. But I appreciate all your time, and it's been a wonderful discussion. As I said, I hope that the participants take away something and go on to create a KPI system that really works for them. So it's been great seeing you, and I look forward to seeing the results of the poll. And I look forward to catching up with the both of you in person. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shahzad and Ming Chu.
Pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone.
Thanks, Ming Chu.
You too. Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anwar. Thanks, Eka.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Yeah.
So folks, thank you so much for joining us. We have a couple of minutes left, and I hope that you will complete the poll. The session has been very useful, and as I said, big change on my part to really appreciating how a rigor and how a complex system of KPIs can be made to use. So thank you for joining me, and take care. Bye-bye.